July 18, 1944, 2:34 p.m. Normandy, France. Coordinates classified. Oberfeldwebel Hans Becker sits in the commander's cupola of his Panzer V Panther, watching the horizon through his periscope with the practiced eye of a man who has been hunting Allied armor since Kursk. He has just destroyed his third Sherman tank of the afternoon. The American M4 burned beautifully, diesel fuel and ammunition cooking off in a pillar of black smoke visible for miles. Becker's gunner, Unteroffizier Franz Müller, had placed the 75mm armor-piercing round precisely into the Sherman's side armor at 800 meters. Textbook kill. The kind of shot that separates veteran crews from corpses. Becker allows himself a moment of satisfaction. 3 Shermans dead. 0 damage to his Panther. The mathematics favored him completely. His tank's frontal armor was 80mm thick, sloped at 55 degrees, effectively 140mm against flat trajectory shots. The Sherman's 75mm gun couldn't penetrate that armor at any range beyond point blank. His 75mm gun, longer and more powerful, could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor at 1,500 meters. Every engagement was a turkey shoot. Then Becker sees something that makes his blood run cold. Through his periscope, cresting the ridge where he just killed 3 Shermans, come 17 more. Not 3, not 5. 17 American M4 Sherman tanks advancing in a formation so dense it looks like a parade ground exercise. Behind them, partially visible through the dust and smoke, are more. Dozens more. Perhaps 100 more. An entire armored division's worth of Shermans advancing across Norman farmland like a plague of steel locusts. Becker does the mathematics instantly. His Panther has 23 armor-piercing rounds remaining. Even if every shot kills a Sherman, which it won't, he'll run out of ammunition long before he runs out of targets. And Shermans never attack alone. Where there are 20 visible tanks, there are 40 more you haven't seen yet, plus infantry, artillery, and fighter bombers circling overhead waiting for German armor to reveal itself. Driver, reverse. Get us into the tree line now. As his Panther retreats into cover, Becker radios his platoon commander with a situation report that has become grimly familiar to every German tanker in Normandy. Enemy armor contact. Estimated 40-plus Shermans advancing on our position. We are withdrawing. We cannot hold. The radio crackles back with orders to delay the American advance as long as possible. Delay. Not stop. Not defeat. Delay. Because everyone knows you cannot stop 50,000 Shermans. You can only kill them one at a time and pray you run out of targets before they run out of tanks. This is the story of how quantity became a quality all its own. How American industrial capacity transformed an admittedly mediocre tank into the weapon that broke the Wehrmacht's back. How German tankers, sitting in technically superior machines, learned to fear not the individual Sherman but the endless tide of them. A plague of M4 tanks that kept coming no matter how many you destroyed. The mathematics of the Sherman were brutal and simple. America built 49,234 of them. Germany's most effective counter, the Panther, numbered 6,000 total production. Even if every Panther destroyed 8 Shermans before being knocked out, America would still have tanks remaining. And that calculation assumed Shermans only fought Panthers, ignoring the thousands of obsolete Panzer IVs, captured French tanks, and improvised assault guns that made up much of Germany's armored force by 1944. German tankers called it Die Pest, the plague, not because individual Shermans were deadly, but because they were endless, inevitable, and impossible to stop. 1940, the beginning. Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. The M4 Sherman didn't begin as a plague. It began as a compromise born from American panic and British desperation. In 1940, as France fell and Britain stood alone, the U.S. Army possessed approximately 400 tanks total. Most were M2 light tanks armed with 50 caliber machine guns, adequate for colonial policing, suicidal against German Panzers. America's medium tank, the M2A1, was already obsolete before production began, its 37mm gun unable to penetrate even the lightest German armor. The British, losing tanks in France at catastrophic rates, desperately needed American armor. But they needed tanks that could fight German Panzers, not colonial rebels. The British Tank Commission arrived at Aberdeen Proving Ground in June 1940 with specific requirements. A medium tank with at least 75mm gun, frontal armor-proof against German 37mm and 50mm guns, mechanical reliability for sustained operations, and, critically, the ability to be mass-produced quickly. The design that emerged was fundamentally conservative. The M4 Sherman used proven components wherever possible. The engine was derived from aircraft radials already in mass production. The transmission was similar to civilian truck designs. The suspension used vertical volute springs, simple, reliable, easy to manufacture. The hull was straightforward welded or cast armor with minimal complex curves that would slow production. The British looked at the design specifications and approved immediately, not because it was excellent, but because it was good enough and, more importantly, could be built in enormous quantities immediately. The first production Sherman rolled off the line at the Lima Locomotive Works in February 1942, just 20 months after design work began. By comparison, Germany's Panther tank would take 3 years from concept to production and would never achieve reliable mass production. The Sherman specifications seemed adequate in 1942, 75mm M3 gun capable of defeating most German armor at combat ranges, 51mm frontal armor sloped at modest angles, top speed of 30 miles per hour, operational range of 120 miles, crew of 5. Not revolutionary, but competent. A workmanlike tank that could be operated by crews with limited training and maintained by mechanics with civilian automotive experience. What American planners understood, and what would prove decisive, was that wars are won not by wonder weapons but by adequate weapons available in overwhelming quantity. The Sherman was designed from the start for mass production at automobile factories, locomotive plants, and heavy equipment manufacturers. It was designed to be shipped across oceans, unloaded at ports with minimal facilities, and driven into combat by teenagers who had been tractor mechanics 6 months earlier. It was designed, in other words, to be built by the tens of thousands. And that's exactly what happened. 1942 to 1943, the production miracle. American industry transformed the Sherman from design to reality with a speed and scale that German intelligence initially dismissed as propaganda. 11 different factories across the United States produced Shermans. The largest was the Fisher Body Division of General Motors Tank Arsenal in Grand Blanc, Michigan, which at peak production completed 1 Sherman every 55 minutes. The Lima Locomotive Works in Ohio, previously building steam engines, retooled and produced Shermans at similar rates. Ford Motor Company's facility, Chrysler's Detroit Arsenal, Pacific Car and Foundry in Washington, all converted to Sherman production with remarkable speed. The production numbers were staggering. In 1942, 14,164 Shermans were built. In 1943, production peaked at 21,245 tanks, an average of 58 Shermans rolling off production lines every single day. By late 1943, American factories were producing more Shermans per month than Germany produced of all tank types combined. But the real miracle wasn't just quantity. It was the logistics system that made those numbers meaningful. Every Sherman had to be transported from factory to port, loaded onto ships, convoyed across submarine-infested oceans, unloaded at foreign ports, prepared for combat, supplied with ammunition and fuel, supported by trained crews, and maintained by mechanics with spare parts. The fact that American industry could do all of this while simultaneously fighting a two-ocean war was what German planners found incomprehensible. Hauptmann Werner Scholz, a German intelligence officer analyzing Allied tank production in 1943, wrote in a classified report that was later captured, "If American production figures are accurate, an interrogation of prisoners and captured documents suggests they are, then Germany cannot win a war of attrition. The Americans are producing tanks faster than we can destroy them. This is not a solvable military problem." The report was filed and ignored by senior leadership, who preferred to believe that German technical superiority and tactical excellence would overcome American numerical advantages. This belief would prove catastrophically wrong. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The Sherman comes to Europe. The invasion of Normandy brought American armor to Europe in overwhelming force. The initial waves included 3 American armored divisions plus British and Canadian armored units. all equipped primarily with Shermans. Over the first week, thousands of Shermans landed on the beaches and pushed inland. German defenders encountered them immediately and discovered something troubling. Individual Shermans were indeed inferior to German tanks, but they never attacked individually. They attacked in platoons of 5, companies of 20, battalions of 60. They attacked with infantry support, artillery coordination, and air superiority that made isolated German tanks easy prey even if technically superior. Lieutenant Otto Carius, one of Germany's most successful tank aces with over 150 kills, encountered his first major Sherman formation near Cannes in early July. His Tiger I tank, with its 88mm gun and 100mm frontal armor, was superior to the Sherman in every technical specification. Carius destroyed 6 Shermans that morning, each kill a demonstration of German tank superiority. Then he ran out of ammunition. "We withdrew to rearm and refuel," Carius wrote in his post-war memoir. "When we returned to our positions 2 hours later, the Americans had replaced their losses and added reinforcements. Where we had faced 20 Shermans in the morning, we now faced 40. We killed 8 more before withdrawing again. The mathematics were clear. They could replace losses faster than we could inflict them." This pattern repeated across Normandy. German tanks would achieve impressive kill ratios in individual engagements, then withdraw as American reinforcements arrived. Superior German tanks became irrelevant when they were outnumbered 5 or 10 to 1. The hedgerow country of Normandy should have favored defenders, and initially it did. German tanks positioned in bocage could ambush Sherman columns from close range, negating the Shermans' numerical advantage. But the Americans adapted with shocking speed, welding improvised steel prongs onto Sherman hulls to tear through hedgerows, coordinating with infantry to clear positions before tanks advanced, and calling in devastating artillery and airstrikes on any German armor that revealed its position. July 1944. Operation Cobra. The breakout. The American breakout from Normandy demonstrated the Sherman's true strength, not as a tank destroyer, but as an exploitation weapon that could advance faster than defenders could retreat. Operation Cobra began on July 25th with a massive aerial bombardment that saturated a narrow sector of German lines. When American armor pushed through the gap, they encountered not prepared defenses but chaos. German units were scattered, communications were disrupted, and retreat routes were clogged with burning vehicles. Sherman-equipped armored divisions raced through the breach, advancing 30 to 40 miles in single days, speeds unthinkable in the static warfare that had preceded the breakout. The Sherman's mechanical reliability, so unimpressive on paper compared to German tanks, became decisive. Shermans could drive 100 miles without major maintenance. German Panthers broke down so frequently that units calculated a 30% breakdown rate for movements over 50 miles. Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Werthmann, commanding a Panther company during the retreat, documented the nightmare in letters later captured. "We are being pursued by endless columns of Shermans. My company began the retreat with 14 Panthers. We have lost 8, not to enemy action, but to mechanical breakdowns. Transmissions fail. Engines overheat. Track links break. We abandoned tanks that could be repaired if we had time and parts, but the Shermans give us neither. They bypass broken vehicles and continue advancing. By the time we establish new defensive positions, they are already flanking them." The breakout from Normandy turned into a pursuit across France. American armored divisions advanced so rapidly that their greatest challenge became logistics. Supply trucks couldn't keep up with Sherman columns racing toward Paris. Entire German units were bypassed and surrounded, their heavy tanks reduced to immobile pillboxes that were eventually destroyed by artillery or airstrikes. August 1944. The Falaise Pocket. The killing ground. The encirclement of German forces in the Falaise Pocket should have been the Wehrmacht's last chance to demonstrate the superiority of German armor. Instead, it became a massacre that proved quantity trumps quality when the quantity gap is wide enough. Approximately 100,000 German troops were trapped in a shrinking pocket, including elements of 5 Panzer divisions with several hundred tanks, a mix of Panthers, Tiger IIs, and Panzer IVs. German commanders attempted a breakout, concentrating their armor for a breakthrough assault. They faced American and British forces equipped with over 500 Shermans and supporting armor. The numbers favored the Allies, but not overwhelmingly, certainly within the range where German technical superiority might matter. What happened instead was systematic annihilation. Allied forces didn't engage in tank versus tank duels where German superiority could matter. They coordinated combined arms assaults. Artillery saturated German positions. Fighter bombers, P-47 Thunderbolts and RAF Typhoons, strafed German armor with rockets and cannons. Infantry with bazookas infiltrated to close range. And when German tanks were suppressed, Shermans advanced in overwhelming numbers to finish crippled vehicles. The Falaise Pocket became a charnel house. Thousands of vehicles were destroyed, creating traffic jams of burning wreckage that trapped troops trying to escape. German tankers abandoned undamaged vehicles because escape on foot offered better survival chances than sitting in tanks that had become targets for every Allied weapon system. Unteroffizier Ernst Barkmann, a Panther ace who survived Falaise, described the experience. "My tank was technically superior to any Sherman. This meant nothing. We were attacked by artillery we couldn't see, aircraft we couldn't shoot, and infantry we couldn't target without exposing ourselves to mass tank fire. I destroyed 4 Shermans on August 19th. It didn't matter. 20 more took their places. We abandoned our Panther, undamaged, and escaped on foot because staying with the tank meant death." September 1944. The Siegfried Line, Germany's last defense. By September, Allied forces had liberated France and reached Germany's western border. The Siegfried Line, fortifications built in the 1930s, should have provided natural defensive terrain where German tanks could fight from prepared positions, negating Sherman numerical advantages. Instead, the Siegfried Line became another demonstration of how overwhelming numbers overcome tactical advantages. German defenders had perhaps 500 operational tanks along the entire Western Front by early September, a mix of types in varying states of readiness. Many were obsolete Panzer IVs. Perhaps 200 were modern Panthers and Tigris. This force faced over 2,000 Allied tanks, mostly Shermans, supported by complete air superiority and artillery dominance. The mathematics were unsustainable. Even if German tanks achieved 3-to-1 kill ratios, which they sometimes did, they would be overwhelmed through attrition. Worse, German tanks that were destroyed stayed destroyed. There were no replacement Panthers arriving from factories running at full capacity. Meanwhile, destroyed Shermans were replaced within days by new tanks shipped from America. Oberst Heinrich Eberbach, a Panzer commander captured in August 1944, provided frank assessment during interrogation. "The Sherman is inferior to our Panthers and Tigers in every technical specification: armor, gun, mobility. This inferiority is meaningless. The Americans have more Shermans than we have ammunition. They can afford to lose 5 Shermans for every German tank and still win the trade. We cannot afford to lose 1 German tank because we cannot replace it." Winter 1944 to 1945. The Battle of the Bulge. Germany's last offensive. Hitler's Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, was Germany's last major armored offensive of the war, and it demonstrated both the strengths and fatal weaknesses of German tank strategy. The offensive committed approximately 400 German tanks, including the newest and most powerful German armor. King Tigers with their 88mm guns and 150mm frontal armor. Panthers by the hundreds. Even some of the rare Jag Panther tank destroyers with 128mm guns. This was the cream of German armor, committed to a desperate gamble to split Allied forces. Initially, the offensive achieved surprise and success. American units were overrun. Equipment was captured. The German spearheads advanced rapidly, and for a few days in December 1944, it seemed possible that German armor superiority might matter after all. Then the weather cleared, and American reinforcements arrived. The U.S. Third Army, commanded by General Patton, reoriented 3 entire divisions, including 2 armored divisions with approximately 400 Shermans, 90 degrees and counterattacked into the German flank within 48 hours. This level of operational mobility, made possible by the Sherman's mechanical reliability and American logistics, was something German forces simply couldn't match. More Shermans arrived daily. The U.S. 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions. British armor from the north. Reinforcements shipped across the Atlantic and rushed to Belgium by rail. Within 2 weeks, Allied forces in the Ardennes outnumbered German forces in both men and tanks, despite the Americans having been surprised and initially driven back. The German offensive collapsed not from tactical defeat, but from mathematical impossibility. They had committed their last operational reserves and achieved impressive local victories. Then they faced American counterattacks with forces that outnumbered them 2-1, supported by air superiority that turned every road into a shooting gallery. Hauptmann Rudolf von Ribbentrop, commanding a Panther company in the Bulge, survived the battle and wrote, "We destroyed 23 American tanks in the first week. We felt victorious. Then the Americans counterattacked with what seemed like hundreds of Shermans. We destroyed more tanks in the second week than in the first, yet there were always more. Our mechanics worked day and night to repair damaged Panthers, but we had no spare parts. American mechanics, we learned from prisoners, simply replaced damaged Shermans with new ones shipped from depots. We were fighting an enemy who could afford to lose tanks like we lost rifle rounds." January-May 1945. The final collapse. The last months of the war in Europe saw the Sherman Doctrine reach its ultimate expression, tanks advancing in such overwhelming numbers that German resistance became futile regardless of technical superiority. By February 1945, American and British forces had approximately 4,000 operational tanks on the Western Front, the vast majority Shermans. German forces had perhaps 1,500 tanks total across all fronts, many immobilized by fuel shortages. The numerical disparity had become so extreme that German doctrine shifted from tank versus tank combat to using armor as mobile artillery, because engaging Allied tanks directly was suicidal. The Rhine crossing in March demonstrated this reality. When Allied forces established bridgeheads across Germany's last major river barrier, they poured Shermans across in numbers that German defenders found incomprehensible. Entire armored divisions crossed within hours. Where German forces might mass 20 or 30 tanks to counterattack a bridgehead, they faced Allied forces with 200. Lieutenant August Koenig, a Panther commander during the Rhine battles, survived to surrender in April. His post-war interrogation included this exchange. Interrogator: "How many Allied tanks did you personally engage?" Koenig: "I stopped counting after 50. Not 50 destroyed, 50 engaged. I destroyed perhaps 12 or 13. The rest either were destroyed by other units or simply continued advancing past my position. There were too many to kill them all." Interrogator: "Did you ever face situations where you ran out of ammunition before running out of targets?" Koenig: "Every engagement. Every single one. We would kill Shermans until our ammunition was exhausted, then withdraw. When we returned to our positions, sometimes just hours later, the Americans had replaced their losses and added more tanks. It was like fighting the ocean. You could kill individual waves, but the tide always came in." The mathematics of attrition. The final accounting of Sherman production and losses tells the story of why German tankers called it the plague. Total Sherman production: 49,234 tanks. Total Sherman losses in European theater: approximately 7,000 Sherman losses to German tank fire. Approximately 4,500 Sherman losses to other causes: mechanical failure, mines, artillery, air attack, etc. Approximately 2,500. This means roughly 85% of Shermans built survived the war. Not because they were invulnerable. Individual Shermans died easily to German tank guns, but because they were built in such overwhelming numbers that losing 7,000 tanks meant nothing to American operational capability. By comparison, total Panther production: 6,000 tanks. Total Panthers lost: approximately 5,200. Panther survival rate: 13%. Total Tiger I production: 1,347 tanks. Total Tigers lost: approximately 1,300. Tiger survival rate: 3%. The numbers reveal the strategic reality. Germany was fighting a war of attrition with an enemy who could sustain attrition indefinitely, while Germany could not. The German tanker's perspective. Post-war interviews with German tank veterans reveal a consistent narrative. Initial confidence in German technical superiority, followed by growing horror at American numerical superiority, culminating in resigned acceptance that the war was unwinnable. Oberstfreiter Kurt Saimtreiter, a Tiger I gunner, provided perhaps the most concise summary. We called the Sherman the plague not because it was deadly to us individually. Our Tigers could kill Shermans at ranges where they couldn't effectively return fire. We called it the plague because they were endless. You could kill 5 Shermans in a morning and face 20 more that afternoon. You could destroy 10 in a day and face 40 the next morning. They kept coming like plague rats, and there were always more of them than you had ammunition to kill. Otto Carius, one of Germany's most successful tank aces, wrote in his memoir, "The Americans fought with material, we fought with courage. But courage without gasoline is just bravery waiting to die." By 1945, we had plenty of courage and no fuel. The Americans had moderate courage and endless fuel. In that equation, the Americans could afford mediocre tanks in vast numbers. We could not afford excellent tanks in small numbers. The psychological impact was devastating. German tankers in 1943 had been confident that technical superiority would triumph. By 1944, they understood they were fighting industrial capacity, not just tanks. By 1945, many were simply trying to survive long enough to surrender to Americans rather than Soviets, knowing the war's outcome was certain. The Sherman's legacy. The M4 Sherman was not a great tank by technical specifications. Its armor was inadequate against German guns. Its 75mm gun, and later 76mm upgrade, was inferior to German weapons. Its height made it conspicuous. Its tendency to catch fire when penetrated earned it the grim nickname Ronson, after the lighter slogan, "Lights first time, every time," among some crews. But the Sherman was a great weapon system because it could be produced in overwhelming numbers, transported across oceans, reliably operated by minimally trained crews, maintained by mechanics with basic automotive skills, supplied with fuel and ammunition consistently replaced rapidly. When destroyed, these practical virtues mattered more than technical specifications. A mediocre tank that's present for the battle beats an excellent tank that's broken down or out of fuel or waiting for spare parts that don't exist. The Sherman won not through individual superiority, but through systematic superiority. Every Sherman was part of an integrated military-industrial complex that could produce, transport, supply, and replace armor faster than Germany could destroy it. This systemic advantage made the Sherman's technical inferiority irrelevant. The final irony. The cruelest irony of German armor development during World War II was that their pursuit of technical excellence made their strategic situation worse, not better. Every hour spent designing the Panther's sophisticated transmission was an hour not spent simplifying it for mass production. Every complexity added to the Tiger's design reduced production rates and increased maintenance requirements. Every new tank model introduced, Panther, Tiger I, Tiger II, Jag Panther, Ferdinand, Elephant, complicated logistics and spare parts supply. Germany produced some of the finest tanks in history, then proceeded to build too few of them, make them too complex to maintain, and operate them in situations where their technical advantages were negated by overwhelming Allied numbers and air superiority. If Germany had instead produced 30,000 simplified, reliable Panzer IVs instead of 6,000 complex Panthers, would they have been better positioned? The question is unanswerable, but it haunted German tankers who watched American industrial capacity deploy mediocre tanks in plague proportions while German industry struggled to deliver excellent tanks in homeopathic doses. May 8, 1945, the last day. When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, approximately 42,000 Shermans remained operational in Allied inventories. Thousands more sat in depots, ready to replace losses that would never occur. American factories had switched back to civilian production in April, confident that existing tank inventories were sufficient to finish the war. German armor on May 8 consisted of perhaps 200 operational tanks of all types, most immobilized by fuel shortages. The disparity was 200:1. If the war had somehow continued, if Germany had fought on for another month or year, the ratio would have only grown more extreme. German tankers who survived to surrender carried with them the memory of a war fought against impossible odds. They had operated the finest tanks in the world and watched those magnificent machines become irrelevant against an enemy who could afford to lose 10 tanks for every one you destroyed and still have reserves. They called it the plague not in rage, but in resignation. Plagues cannot be defeated by killing individual carriers. Plagues are defeated by systemic responses, vaccination, quarantine, public health infrastructure. Germany tried to defeat the Sherman plague with individual tactical excellence, which was like trying to stop a flood with a bucket. The Sherman won because America understood that modern warfare is won in factories, not on battlefields. It's won by logistics chains that function reliably across oceans. It's won by training systems that produce adequate crews in large numbers. It's won by maintenance systems that keep machines running. It's won by industrial capacity that can sustain losses indefinitely. 50,000 Shermans. Not because each one was exceptional, but because 50,000 adequate machines, present and functional, beat 6,000 excellent machines that were too few, too complex, and ultimately too late. The German tankers who called it the plague understood, in the end, that they had been fighting not American tanks but American industry. And that was a battle lost before it began.